Or is it showing today?
That's good.
Huh?
That's good.
Oh, okay. Born February 5th, 1924, Women's Hospital in Manhattan. Parents were Max and Bertha Bash. Max was born June 15th, 1895. Bertha was born February 27th, 1900.
Where were they born?
Each was born in what was then a part of the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. It was all Russia at that time. However, in reality, Mother was born in Vilna, which is now Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, and my father was born in the second largest city in Poland, spelled L-O-D-Z, pronounced Woods. But that was all Russia, and their passports all read country of birth, Russia. Since I've seen the passports, I know. I was born February 5th, 1924, and at that time, home was in the Bronx, one of the 5 boroughs of New York. Was born on Daly Avenue, 1800 Daly, D-A-L-Y. Lived my first 8 years in 2 basic areas of the Bronx, Pelham Parkway and Marshall Parkway, which were both kind of northwest in the borough. Things got very, very rough in the early 30s because of the depression that was going on in this country, where people were killing themselves daily. In fact, the Daily News would have a leader on the front page every day for the number of people who committed suicide that day in New York City. Off bridges, in front of trains, off buildings, taking poison, whatever they felt they wanted to do. It was a very stressed out time. My father's associates urged him to come to Europe, where he had family and a business waiting for him. Finally, at one point, my mother, crying in the kitchen, said to my father, "Max, we don't have a potato in the house for 4 children. This is very, very, very bad. I don't know what I'm going to do." And so my father said, "This is ridiculous. I think it's time for us to go to Europe." So at age 8, 1932 was the year, took the Lloyd ship, the Bremen, to Cherbourg, France, which was the port for Paris at that time. My father met us at the port, and we took the port train into Paris. I lived in a very, very exclusive area of Paris, Avenue Georges V, which is the street that leads into the Eiffel Tower. Had a governess, and I used to ride my little trike under the Eiffel Tower at age 8. Then we moved on to Leipzig, Germany, which eventually became the capital of East Germany during the big Russian-American Cold War. And Leipzig is still one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. And while I was in Leipzig, there was no idea of ever coming back to the United States. I was going to school there, a school called Dr. Kalabas Hochschule, and German was going to be my language forever. However, I did have a woman coming in 2 or 3 days a week, a British woman, so that I wouldn't forget English. We also had a cook and an assistant cook living on premises. We had a handyman living on premises. We had, for me, a study room. For my mother, a sewing room. For my father, a music room. We had almost a museum. It was the top floor of a 4-story building in Leipzig. We call it a condo today. It was a home, with help living on there in their own facilities. Things started to get a little rough. There was a group in 1934, we called them the Bully Boys. They were the young swastika Nazi youth. And their only mission in life was to beat up kids and to steal, and to show how big boy they were at 16 and 17. And that turned the neighborhood into chaos, and ultimately the decision was made through my father's associates to get his wife and kids back to the States. There was going to be real big trouble in Germany, and that was 1934. And of course, the rest is history. We came back, we stopped off and visited some relatives in a number of cities, including Hamburg, where my father's first cousin was running a racetrack, and he had stables of horses and very influential in the community. Needless to say, all of my father's family and people that I knew as an 8-year-old were ultimately all put to death by the Nazis in the concentration camps. And came back to the United States, went back to the Bronx, lived at 2435 Creston Avenue, which is in the Fordham Road area, kind of a nice neighborhood, and went to 2 schools there. PS 33, which was a building built in 1887, originally as a hospital, and another school building, PS 69, which was down the street from Creston Avenue, and was actually a junior high school. And in all the years until I came back to the United States at age 9, I had gone to 7 public schools in the Bronx. So it was a case of not having money to pay rent, moving on to the next, and the whole city was musical apartment. And they would give something very, very interesting. The landlords would give 1 month concession when you signed the lease. You paid for 3 months as you went along. Your next month, being the 5th month, was also free, and then you moved to somewhere else where it started all over again. The first month free, you live there for 3 months, the next month is free, and you move on. And it was a terrible, terrible time for the people in New York City, but obviously the whole country, until a very wonderful president started doing his magic, and that was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And I'll lead into it later. Right now, I'm going to drink my coffee. Okay. Laura Lewis just asked me to explain a little bit of how my parents met. And it's kind of interesting. My father came over in 1918 from the Leipzig Conservatory of Music. He was an accomplished concert violinist, and he had an opportunity. He came over here to work in what they called burlesque, but was really vaudeville. It was not burlesque as we later came to know it. And in 1919, he was making the interesting sum of $350 a week. 1919, working
It's a fortune.
It's a fortune. And he was going to Cooper Union to finish off his education. I don't know if he graduated Cooper Union. Along the way, he met a woman called Bertha Megan. Take it back. My mother's name was Bertha. Martha Megan, who was her older sister. All the people who came over from Vilna started a society at 116th Street and Madison Avenue in New York called the Vilna Society. Well, they were women mostly, dragged their husbands along, and they met regularly, and they were basically socialists. They belonged to the socialist thought process, and their children went to socialist camps, including me. And all the friends I knew when I was growing up in the early years were children from these parents. Some who were doctors at that point, my father was a musician. And through the Vilna Society, and he must have been invited there for a dance. Martha, her sister, said, I have a beautiful sister living in Vilna, living in Berlin, and I'll tell you that part of the story, and I want to bring her to the United States. Would you be interested in meeting her? So, of course, any red-blooded man would say, of course. So my mother came over, met my father, and I guess I'm the result. But it's kind of interesting what my mother went through. The Kazakhs were out there running across all of Europe, Eastern Europe, stealing, killing, and raping women. And in the area where my mother was living, which was Vilna, Lithuania, they had committed many, many crimes. So my mother's mother packed 2 little sandwiches together, put them in a napkin, and told her to run to the German lines. She and her girlfriend, Manya, who I later met, ran for the German lines at night, slept in the daytime, wherever they could find a place to sleep. And finally, with the German army and Kaiser Wilhelm, who was the Kaiser of Germany, across a river, they started running towards the river. The Kazakhs started chasing them. My mother took a bullet in her right leg, which she had into her death. Kaiser Wilhelm sent the German army across the river, shooting all the way, and they chased away the Cossacks. They carried my mother, laid her down at his feet. Now, he had a wilted left arm, like this. And he had his surgeon with him all the time. So the surgeon looked at the leg and said, it's in a fleshy part, it won't bother her, we can take care of it later. And Kaiser Wilhelm said, I want her to get away from here, I want put her on the next troop train to Berlin. And the surgeon said, I'll let her stay with my sister and help my sister run my office in Berlin. So what happened was, my mother ended up in Berlin, became a nurse, literally, and helped in the office until her sister brought her to the United States. And it was something that was very, very common, bringing relatives over. And all of these people had only one object in life: to become an American citizen. They took out their first papers as fast as they could. They went to school 5 nights a week, public school, to learn English. And all of the friends, all of the people that I knew, including Dr. Bedtower, that was German, Leon Savage belonged to the organization. He was the attorney, and he also ran a camp, which I later went to as a counselor. And it was an interesting group. One of the people there, their son became a Metropolitan Opera star and was enormously famous in that period of time. And
Do you recall the name?
I will it'll come back to me. He changed it into an Italian name from a Jewish name. So
Yeah, but
yeah,
what name he went under?
you know, but he was very, very famous, and he used to come to all the affairs, and and growing up in New York was very, very fascinating. Living at 2435 Creston Avenue, I was behind a vaudeville theater called Lowe's Paradise, which was like the fanciest movie house in the United States. I mean, with a moving sky, huge, huge place. And I lived behind, or the stage door portion, and on Saturdays I would go in there and scrape gum off the bottom of the seats, and I would get free admission to the theater for the cartoons, which was Saturday morning. They had cartoons. Cartoons didn't mean cartoons. They could be cowboy stories. They could be Mutt and Jeff. They could be anything. They called them cartoons. In reality, they were short movies, things like Batman Today and all that stuff. And I used to go in there free every single Saturday. And also, since it was stage door and it was vaudeville, I would stand there with my little autograph book when, after the 8:30 or 9 o'clock performance at night, the people would come out. And people would come out like George Burns and Gracie Allen, and the others who would come out of there would be comedians and who were very important, like Milton Berle would be one who would come out. No. So that was very
Was
fascinating.
that because they used to have stage shows before
They had
the
stage
movies?
shows, yes,
As a
yes,
part of the movie?
yes, it was vaudeville, really.
Was it vaudeville, or was it that they showed movies? Was it a movie theater or vaudeville?
It was a movie theater that had live acts before the thing.
They showed the movies, okay,
Yeah.
that's the
These
way
people, George Jessel was another one who may mean nothing to you. He was one of these Hollywood characters who got married 600 times, and once I saw him drive up. When I was staying at the Plaza Hotel, he drove up in his limousine with a girl, and even the doorman said, she can't be a day over 16. George Jessel had quite a reputation. But while I lived at 2435 Creston Avenue, across the street from where I lived was a market along the lines of what you would call, it had a fruit market, it had a butcher shop, it had a dairy section, and it had a bakery all together. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I first started working in the butcher shop, which was right across, where they used to butcher live chickens. They used to cut the throats, and they would walk around bleeding to death. And then JerryBash would take over. He would pull the feathers off these still warm chickens and singe the feathers on a gas stove. You were talking about a 10-year-old kid.
And what, did they pay you for that?
Oh, I got a quarter a day. But then I moved up in the world. I moved over to the dairy section where I ladled milk. People would bring their milk containers and I would take it and ladle milk or cream, and where I would cut butter from butter tubs. And I got pretty good to cut a pound of butter with that little wire thing. And for that, because, I mean, that was a step up. I got 50 cents a day, okay? And eventually ended up moving to Manhattan.
Well, wait a minute, was that the store where you
Yeah,
got
that's
the pickles too?
yes, yeah.
With
Oh
the
yeah,
pickle barrel?
oh yeah, it's a pickle barrel. In front of the dairy thing, they had 2 huge barrels. One was herring, and the other one was pickles, what we would call sour pickles. And here I am, little JerryBash. I was about the same size. And woman would come, she'd say, I want 2 pickles. So I would reach in and I'd take 2 pickles and put them on a piece of paper. And she'd say, no, from the bottom. I said, they're the same. You can't see at the bottom. She said, I don't care. I want from the bottom. So, of course, little JerryBash would hang over the top of the 65-gallon barrel, reaching down as far as I could and bring out some pickles. And she would look at it and, this is better. I almost drowned in brine. But eventually, my father was in Europe again, and coming back, he decided to move to Manhattan, Upper Manhattan, which is really where I look at my childhood and growing up and all my friends from afterwards. And we moved to Upper Manhattan. The address was 91 Payson Avenue, Payson, and it was up from Dyckman Street, which is 200th Street in Manhattan. And it was a very, very interesting neighborhood. 91 Payson Avenue was on a street called 15 Beck Street, B-E-C-K. It was the shortest street in New York. It had one house on it, ours. And we lived on the 3rd floor, apartment 3D as in David. And my father traveled, and I started going to school. And it's interesting, as Laura knows, across the street from where I lived, on Seaman, S-E-A-M-A-N Avenue, there was a young girl, my age, whose windows faced my windows, meaning, but across a big, long street in a parking lot. I still know her, I still see her. She lives in Toms River, New Jersey. Her name is Hadassah Berger. She was my 9-year-old girlfriend, and from 10 years old, not 9. And so we've remained friends ever since. Laura has met Hadassah. Her sister Shalamith, a real Hebrew name, taught me how to dance. And we later found out, when both our mothers had passed away, that they both came from the same city. And we could kick ourselves that they probably grew up together in the ghetto in Vilna
And
with me.
never knew they were.
But they never knew, across the street, we never knew because she didn't ask me and I didn't ask her. But while I was living in Manhattan, and is it the end?
I'm not sure. Let me check. It's blinking, so I'm not quite sure.
Inwood became an unbelievable neighborhood to live in. I was against a park called Inwood Park, which ran from 200th Street up to about 220th Street without a single light in the park, with potholes from the Glacial age. At 207th Street or 208th Street, there was an Indian teepee still there with an Indian family physically living there. And on the corner of Payson Avenue and Big Street, many years later, the Museum of Natural History located a Revolutionary War clam bake right where the benches were on the corner there. And they excavated, and they got, it was a British Army clam, or they called it a clam bake because the British Army was eating fish and clams, and there were buckles from the British Army, broken English bottles, a few non-broken. And in the Museum of Natural History, they have a whole section devoted to what they got out of that one single area there. It was also interesting that my father, who was a concert violinist, would play with Yasha Heifetz, Isaac Stern, and all the big names in music in the bedroom with my mother and father.
Well, they were all immigrants, weren't they? European immigrants?
Yeah, they were all European
And
immigrants.
so they knew
Yasha
each other.
Heifetz was Russian, of course. Isaac Stern, I think, was German. And my father spoke 9 languages. My mother spoke 5. My father had offices before World War II.
What did he do?
Am I talking, or are you going to be the interviewer?
What did he do?
I was just coming to it. We're going to end very soon. My father was in the import-export business, and before the war, he had an office in Harbin, Manchuria, Windhoek, Southwest Africa, which is now Namibia, and London, Paris, Milan, Munich, Moscow, that I know about. And he was importing, originally he started importing hides and furs and selling them to the hat industry and the shoe industry. Now, Russia supplied out of Manchuria the finest heavy fur animals because of Siberia. Out of Kabul, Afghanistan, where I visited once with a $22 million letter of credit pinned inside my jacket for the chase back. I have spent a long 4 hours in Kabul, Afghanistan, in about 1949 or 50, and then had lunch with the people that I was delivering the check to, and got back on the plane and got the hell out of there. But Afghanistan was where all the luxurious caracal and Persian lambs came from. The finest lambs in the world came from Afghanistan, and that's what they grew there. Now they grow poppies. But in those days, all the farms were farms growing up. And in the neighborhood, Inwood, I learned to do an awful lot of things. 200th Street had a garbage disposal plant. And I had a 22, and there was also a boat dock there where they racked boats. And I bought myself a canoe with my little $quarters, a 16-foot Old Town canvas canoe with 2 paddles. And I used to keep it at the boathouse, and every night I would go down to the garbage disposal plant and sit on the crest of the hill there with my 22 and wait for the sun to go down. And as the little rats stuck their heads out of the rocks near the garbage disposal plant, I would pick off the rats. Now, rats are carnivorous, so there was nothing left the next day. Their buddies came up there and ate them. And I had my own private beach at 222nd Street in Spike and Diagonal. And I used to take my little girlfriends for a canoe ride on the Hudson River to my own private beach. And this was young JerryBash. And when I went into service, the guy at the boathouse had said, "Jerry, I'm going to keep this boat for you when you come back. Give it back to you. We're going to hold it for you till you come back, and you are coming back." Well, when I did come back, and he walked in and he hugged me and all the rest of it, he said, "I really don't want a canoe anymore." So he said, "Here, take it for all that." I said, "No." He said, "I'll buy it from you." I said, "Okay, what's it worth?" He said, "No. What do you want for it?" I said, $25. He said, "Okay." He peeled to it, $25. 16-foot Old Town canvas canoe with 2 paddles. Inwood was wonderful, wonderful. During the Depression, and it was still going on before the war. Down at the boat, there was a house at the bottom of the hill on 200th Street, which was Diagonal Street, and Payson Avenue, which was the street I lived on, and the park, Inwood Park, went into it. It was a field house, and there they used to have entertainment from the WPA. Now, Franklin Roosevelt, when he came into the Depression, took over a country that you wouldn't believe how poor it was and what was going on. And he and his brain trust, which were very bright men, Democrat, most of them I think, who try to bring this country back. And they created 5 things which were unbeatable and have saved more lives. They started with CCC, for the runaways, the orphans, put them to work on the national parks, blazing trails, cutting the paths and creek. That's CCC. They were behind barbed wire, but on weekends they went to town. They only slept. Number 2 was WPA. It took artists, it took workers, it took all kinds of people, put them back to work, doing things. In fact, I met Shari Lewis, who had just passed away with this, at the field house with Magpie, and a guy who died last year at 93, the top magician in the United States. He was there living off WPA because there was no way the arts would have anything. That's 2. 3 was PWA, Project Works Administration. Built every post office in the United States in 1932 and 1933, and Hoover Dam and Muscle Shoals Dam. Cheap electricity. 4, something that this country should kiss him forever. It was called the GI Bill of Rights. And there were 16,009,9 men and women under arms in the military. Coming back, no jobs, a country that was just off bankruptcy as a country just finishing a war. And what he did with his brain trust was set up the GI Bill of Rights, affording everyone who was in service X number of days based on their service. Now, I was a very high pointer, and I had a huge amount of points, enough to get a PhD. I got 2 masters, finished my college education, all on the GI Bill. And the 5th thing is something that this country is living with now, thank God, and that is Social Security, 1945, they had enough brains to put together what is now saving this country, an aging country. This was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Democrat, and his brain trust, which I think was across a lot of parties. And without what these people put together at the end of the war, would have been unbelievable what this country would have gone into chaos, and it may be coming.
What war was there?
19
What war?
World War II. Thank you. I should have said French and Indian War, but you wouldn't believe me. It's kind of interesting, though. Along the way in service, I enlisted. I was in the ROTC at New York University, and I was in the infantry, and I was a BAR man. Now, the BAR is the Browning automatic rifle. It weighs 38 pounds, fires 20 shots. It was the most powerful of the weapons that the infantry had. Now, little Jerry Bash thought it over and figured out that there was no way he was going to go into the infantry carrying a 38-pound gun, crawling on his knees and elbows.
What did you weigh?
Huh?
What did you weigh? What did you weigh?
When I went in, when I went in physically at age 19, I weighed 117 pounds,
Carrying
and
a
I
38 pound.
had a 26-inch waistline, I think. Would you say a big boy?
With a 38-pound rifle.
And oh yeah. But I finally decided in October of 1942 to enlist. And my mother was in the hospital at the time, and my father wouldn't sign the papers without my mother's permission. And my mother, of course, said, anything Jerry wants to do is okay with me, in so many words. And so she signed my papers on the hospital bed. And I went down, and we had a 3-day physical and mental qualification period, 3 days at the 98th Armory on Park Avenue in New York. And they did everything from the physical, the eyes, all kind of tests and all. And finally, I was accepted into the Army Air Corps, which is what I had enlisted for, and would wait for further orders. So I went back to school and all that kind of stuff. And then I got my orders to report to, you're going to love this, Atlantic City, New Jersey. And I went to a Notre Dame NYU basketball game at Madison Square Garden the night before. And while I'm sitting there, I'm telling my girlfriend, Janet Grusmark, that I'm leaving in the morning for the Air Corps. And she went off the wall. Couldn't you tell me everything? The boys knew, and she didn't know. Anyway, and the guys, they wished me well and all, drove me home. Got up, took the subway down to Pennsylvania Station, got on a train to Atlantic City, New Jersey Central at that time, or the Pennsylvania Railroad, whichever it was. Got off in Atlantic City with thousands of other guys. They marched us from the train station to the convention hall, where they said to us, okay guys, disrobe. Now if you can picture 3,000 guys standing in their buff, naked with their clothes on the floor, and as the doctors or the medics came by, they said, bend over. 3,000 guys. And then I never saw those clothes again. They put them in a paper bag. And then they came by and they said, what size shoe do you wear? In a cart, and put it down. I got 2 pair of socks, 2 pair of underwear, 2 shirts, 2 ties, and 2 pair of pants. Okay? And a duffel bag. And I raised my right hand, and you're in the Army now. And I went to the best hotel at that time in Atlantic City. It was a lot different. It was on Park Place and where's the Monopoly? What's the,
Boardwalk.
huh? Boardwalk and Park Place was where the hotel was. Okay. And we lived triple decker in the hotel, 3 triple deckers in a room. That's 9 guys, 1 bathroom, in the middle of February. They called us all together and, we started running and marching and doing calisthenics and all the rest of the stuff in the sand along the ocean. We actually saw 1 ship torpedoed by the German. The German Navy submarines were right off the coast, 5 miles off New Jersey, 6 miles off New Jersey. We actually were running in our winter clothes and everything on the beach, and we heard this tremendous explosion, and we saw the fire out, maybe 8 miles out, 10 miles out. It was an Italian ship, we later found out. And finally, when we finished our 4 weeks basic training, which is what Atlantic City was, all of us in that class got on a train going to Syracuse, New York. We were going to something called the 65th CTD, College Training Detachment, which is where they were going to hold us until they had places for us in the military, actually. So I was in what used to be a sorority house in Sorority Row up in Syracuse, New York, and it was kind of interesting. But on the train up to Syracuse, 5 guys came down with spinal meningitis, which they had picked up in Atlantic City, and we were all quarantined for like 5 weeks, 6 weeks in there. It was pretty tough. And all the girls in the sorority houses would put underwear in the window, their little panties, they were bigger panties, and write all kinds of notes with, Laura will remember Babbo?
Mm-hmm.
You could mix it with water.
Was a cleanser like Comet.
Yeah, but you could write with it. So we would write, my name is, my number is, so finally we got out, I dated, and I dated one girl for many, many years afterwards who became a very dear friend, and but just dating, it was strictly going out, you know. We also took some courses up in Syracuse. I took a physics course, and actually they had a duplication in one building there, which had a rotunda of Berlin, and they duplicated the city of Berlin, all the buildings and everything. And from where we were at the top of the rotunda, we're looking down, it was the same at 25,000 feet. And they let us kind of, as if we were bombing Berlin, picking out things like that. And from there, they sent us, when they were ready for us in the military, they sent us to Nashville, Tennessee, which was the classification center. And at Nashville, you took all the tests and they told you what you qualified for. I qualified for pilot, navigator, and bombardier, and I had my choice. I wanted to be a hotshot fighter pilot, so I said, pilot training. Okay, so when the next class opened up in Bentonville, South Carolina, which is called, I forgot to mention, I took 10 hours of flying up in Syracuse, New York. It was my first time I ever was in a plane. And actually here is, it's called the Controlled Indoctrination Flight Course Pilot Rating Book, me. And this was actually probably in April and May, I'll look when we open it up, of 1943. Let's see what I bring. This is the actual, 43, June 5th, 1943. Ground instruction time, 1 hour. Me, still signature looks the same, and him, and whatever it is, A-flat, was this D's? These
Yeah.
all D's?
Yeah.
What does it say? This is my first flight ever.
Seems like good
Material.
material, yeah.
Seems like good. You mean I got all these D's or?
Well,
I
it was
can't.
the first time.
Yeah, but after taking judgment, at least I had judgment. My first flight ever in an airplane was June 5th, 1940. Okay, the make of the aircraft, and then the number. Oh, now, whatever it is, there are numbers in here too, aren't there? Whatever it is. Throttle and they were doing different things at different. And actually,
Oh, the 4 not an A.
what is it? Check flight satisfactory. That's when you go up in stage A, lesson 4. Date. I don't understand. The numbers meant something. They're all 4s.
Yeah.
Oh, it's lesson
So
4.
I don't know what D means. D means. It wasn't an A for the first time.
I don't think it's a DD. Whatever it is, rating sheet. What's it? Lesson 8. What does it say? I don't know. Whatever it is. Is that all I had 8? I thought I had 10 hours. Or I had 10. Maybe it was just 9. 9 shows
Improvements.
is eager.
Yep, 2 letters.
Oh, good. Check flight satisfactory. That's when I do everything. Dives. There's all kinds of crap here. I guess I only did 9 hours. No, I did 10. Yeah. That was it. So I had 10 hours in what was a biplane. You still see him flying and doing acrobatics and stuff like that. So my first flying I ever did and was up in Syracuse, New York, Hamilton Field. And then I went on from Syracuse, I went down to Nashville, Tennessee, qualification, qualified for pilot training. I wanted to be a hotshot fighter pilot. And so we went to Bennettsville, South Carolina. And in Bennettsville, I started flying and doing my stuff, and boom, boom, boom. And then went on to Moultrie, Georgia for basic flying. And then I washed out. I wasn't good enough to die. So they sent me back to Nashville, Tennessee, where they started all over. And they said, okay, what do you want, navigation or bombardier? I said, navigation. So they sent me to, well, actually, I went through, long story, the train went from Nashville to Memphis, through Memphis onto another crazy track, went along to a city called New Orleans, Louisiana, where I got off and spent the night there, my first time ever in New Orleans, and went crazy with the jazz, sticking my head down inside windows and all. And while I was there, a man in the library where I was writing a letter home said to me, don't go into town, be careful. I said, huh? And he said, I picked up a venereal disease here, lost my wife, lost all my money that the government gives. They put me in a sweat box, brought it up to 120 degrees, which is what they did in those days, to try to kill the syphilis, but it didn't work. Don't go into town, promising. So I didn't go into town. After I talked to him, I had dinner at the YMCA, which is where I was staying. And then the next morning I got on a train and I went to Solomon Field, Monroe, Louisiana, which was navigation school. And it was a wonderful, wonderful career. And believe it or not, I was editor of the yearbook in Bronx High School of Science, which I didn't talk about at all, which I'd like to speak about later. It was a very special school. And I was in the second graduating class, and I have many, many letters from the principal in Bronx Science. I made many contributions there, and it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. And in Solomon Field, Louisiana, I also became editor of the class book there, which was what I was at NYU also. And met a very, very wonderful couple. He was one of the Birds of Virginia, a very famous bird family. Of course, the ancestor who went to the North Pole first. And that family runs politics in Virginia, not West Virginia. There is a bird in West Virginia, a different person, different family. And he and his wife, who came in with 4 chauffeured limousines and furniture and set up housekeeping in downtown Monroe, used to pick us up at night, he and I, and we would go to West Monroe to a steakhouse right on the river where we would get a steak for 98 cents, steak dinner for 98 cents. And I corresponded with him. I've been trying to look him up. I don't know if he made it through the war, because a lot of my class in pilot training and in navigation school got overseas early and never made it through World War II. And when I finally, in 1945, was in Greensboro, North Carolina, and my last job for the Air Force, was going through and separating people coming back from overseas. A lot of guys I went to school with in the early years, 43 and 44, came through and they would say to me, "Remember so-and-so? He bailed out and the Germans used him for target practice as he was coming down in the parachute. Remember so-and-so? He crashed in the English Channel and was lost," and on and on and on. So I always look back on the years when I washed out as a gift to live, because had I gone through with my class, the chances of me being here is almost nil, absolutely nil. And I picked up, I was very, very lucky, and I'll get to my crew and when the crew got together, a lot of the other things at a later time. But I was very, very fortunate because although I personally didn't like him and he didn't like me, my pilot was a crop duster from Oklahoma. He had 10,000 hours in these little crop duster planes jumping fences over there. Was 36 years old, too old to get into service, but he got a job at one of the primary flying schools in Oklahoma, and knew a lot of people in the Pentagon, and finally got them at age 39 to make him a combat pilot. So in luck, I got one hell of a pilot. Not only did he bring me back alive, but Nathan Twining, general of the 15th Air Force, used to love to fly with him. And we had very, very interesting missions. We were lead crew most of the time. I'll tell you some of the training we had in the States later, where we actually lost out of Boise, Idaho, which is where the crew was put together. We lost 2 planes Christmas week of 1943 when they crashed into the mountains between Boise and Mountain Home, Idaho, and they were all killed on the plane. And as I will talk about some of the missions, the first 5 missions you have in combat are with other crews. In other words, you just go along for the ride. You don't do anything except maybe fire a gun if you're attacked. So the first 5 missions were with other crews. The 6th mission was when our crew got together, and one of the members of my crew, Barton Kirker, the bombardier, was lost in one of those 5 missions when we didn't fly together. His plane flew into the Alps. He was killed. He was in the nose of the plane. And so we lost one of our crew people before we ever assembled, and flew together. Barton Kirker was 19 years old. And he came from Nemaha, Nebraska, just north of Omaha. And He was buried in Barry Cemetery, and I think after the war, his family brought the body back to the States. But those are, you know, simple little tragedies, as they like to report in the newspaper, but very personal when you're 19 and 20 years old and you're learning a whole new skill, how to kill, and you lose one of them. So I'm going to end it right here for a while. Okay? Hey, camera, that's it for now.